When I was at Georgetown studying how government actually works, I got curious about what it would actually take to run for Congress myself. So I went to a free campaign training workshop for veterans. They walked us through everything. What I learned was a total gut punch. To have a realistic shot at winning in my part of Connecticut, not a guaranteed win, but a realistic shot, I would need to raise about $2 million and be able to take a year or two off from my day job. I remember standing there and thinking, this isn't how it's supposed to work. America is supposed to be built on equal access and competition. But the pool of people who can represent us in government is so incredibly small if there's this barrier to entry. And that was just my district. In Connecticut, a non expensive media market. Nationally, it's far worse.
In the last series, we traced how the economic rules were rewritten to benefit a small number of people. Today, we start following that same concentration of money into the political system because the economy didn't rig itself. Someone had to keep the politicians pointed the other way. Chris, you ran for office, twice in fact. So you've lived this from the inside out. Let's start with what the money does to a politician's time, because the numbers here are something most people have never heard.
Yeah, it's such a good point because at the end of the day, I think most people think their legislator spends most of their time legislating. And really, in any campaign before you even get to the job, the biggest part you have to do is fundraising. And that's always the very first part of a campaign. And so you as a candidate say, hey, I think I have some good ideas. I think I want to see some change. And this is regardless of what your particular political preference is. And then the question becomes, where are you going to raise all that money? And so the first plan of action, which shows support, it shows enthusiasm of voters to support you. You go out and you talk to people who are likely to donate to your campaign and you organize events specifically for them. Because if you can't fundraise, you can't really run an effective campaign, which is, by the way, in any other industry would just be called a marketing campaign or a marketing plan. And you have to be able to buy ads. You have to be able to buy Facebook ads. You have to be able to buy television time, depending on the level of race you're at. And if you can't do that, you're probably not going to be successful in today's politics. And that's something I think most people don't realize of how much politicians really have to focus on fundraising, especially in the early days.
Huh. So I've always assumed that representatives spend their most of their time legislating, voting, and doing, constituent working. But what is the research showing about how much the congressional time is actually spent?
Yeah, so what current research is showing is your average member of Congress can spend up to 70% of their time just fundraising, even after they're elected to office. That's 70%. That leaves just 30%, 30% of their time left for doing the job that we actually elected them to do, to look at policy briefs, to actually try to debate what's the best path forward, to actually try to come up with new solutions. And oh, by the way, every candidate is doing that all the time because they know that 97% of candidates who win their elections have more money than the other side. So it is possible to win with less money, but that's only 3% of campaigns. 97% of campaigns just outspend the other side. And that's a huge metric. And what does that do to you if you're a candidate who wants to keep doing good work in an institution, by the way, based on seniority? So the longer you can stay there, the more influence you can, in theory, have. And what that means is that you're spending the vast majority of your time around very high net worth people who can donate a lot of money to your campaign. You're doing fundraisers with them, you're doing events with them, you're spending every moment you have calling them. And that ends up coloring the way you view the world because you're constantly surrounded by those folks of that particular income class. And you don't even need to take just that logic for it with a couple data points. There's this really amazing study that Professor Gillens and Page did when they were at Princeton, and they've since moved on to other institutions, where they looked at the likelihood of Congress to actually do something based on American perceptions. So the idea being, if we live in a democracy, that if 100% of Americans agreed on something, Congress should be far more likely to institute that idea than if zero Americans agreed on it at the extremes. And there should be some correlation between the two, not perfectly necessarily, but there should be some relationship there. And when you pull apart the economic strata and you look at average American working class folks, there is zero correlation. Congress is just as likely to pass something if zero Americans agree on it versus 100% of Americans agree on it. And then you look at that same relationship between either interest groups, which is very correlated, or high net worth individuals. Again, highly correlated, but not correlated at all with average American working class people. And so you have this entire institution of people who are basically professional fundraisers to try to do some good that have to be responsive to the people who have the money to donate to their campaigns. And we're seeing it in the outcomes of what Congress is and isn't doing.
So this feels like it takes the balance of power and just automatically shifts it to those who have a lot more money than the average American person who want their own views reflected in Congress, their own interests. Am I right?
You're absolutely right.
Well, could you feel that in when you were running in Connecticut? Did the rules of the system and the fundraising necessities come into play substantially?
So here in Connecticut, specifically for state level races, we have a different set of rules. And it's called the Citizen Election Program. And what that program does is it's government program that any candidate running for office can access with some rules around it. For someone running for a state representative seat like I did, you had to raise about $5,000, give or take. It changes every year, but you had to raise that in small dollar amounts between $5 to $300 from individual people. And you had to raise that from a minimum of 150 people in your district. And then you could raise the rest of that money from other Americans in other states if you wanted to, or keep fundraising from within your district. But once you had 150 people in your district donate to your campaign as a state rep candidate, and you achieve the sort of 5,000 ish mark, depending on the year, then you submit your paperwork to the state election officials and they write your campaign a check. In my years, it was like for 36 or $37,000. And that's all of the money you get to spend. My opponent got the same amount once he achieved his benchmark. And so what the system does, and it's a system here in a state in the United States of America that, yeah, still had to fundraise, couldn't do it without zero fundraising support, had to get people to write $5 donations for me in the district I lived at. And once I achieved that mark, I didn't do any fundraising. From there on out, it was all voter outreach. I didn't have to worry about it at all. And it also focused my fundraising on people who I wanted to vote for me too. And it just completely reset the incentive structure of how I, as a candidate, would spend my time.
That's so eye-opening. So, am I right to say then that the rules for fundraising and running for office is different at the national level than it is at the state level, and then each state is different?
That is very much true. Every state can technically set their own rules for every election, but the federal standards for federal elections hold true across all states. And those standards have shifted in our own lifetimes pretty significantly.
No kidding. So, the involvement, it sounds like, of interest groups, lobbyists, corporations are having a huge effect then.
They are having a massive effect. And they're having a massive effect because of the new vehicles that they have to actually donate. And let me rewind the clock just a little bit.
Okay.
When we were born, or when our parents were voting and like when they were at where we were in our life journey, the a company could always donate to a federal campaign. So if a local business wanted to donate to your member of Congress who is running because they like them, they're pro business, pro their business, whatever, they could. But that business can only donate the amount of money that an individual could donate, which I think the limit is right around 5,000 ish dollars for every election cycle. So that's primary, general election, runoff if you have it. But and it kind of made sense at the time. So I'll just use Eastern Connecticut. We make nuclear submarines, a company called Electric Boat, right? If Electric Boat wants to form a political action committee back in the day and donate $5,000 to their member of Congress who keeps getting more nuclear submarines made, that was fine, but that was their limit back in the day. And they could tell their employees, hey, it's in our interest for this particular candidate, and they could try and rile up their employees. They could do that. That was all fair. Well, along came Citizen United and a couple other Supreme Court decisions that basically made that rule where people with a lot of money don't have to donate directly to campaigns. Those limits all still are in effect. But they created this vehicle called a super PAC. A PAC is a political action committee. That's what companies could always form. A super PAC is a political action committee not aligned with any individual candidates that could run issue ads. And those PACs, those political action committees, don't have to disclose where they get their money on from and how they're spending it as long as they don't coordinate directly with a campaign. So you can see how this plays out, right? If I'm a billionaire and I want to run a whole bunch of anti-government ads that happen to support very right-wing candidates, I can as long as I don't ask them about it first. And I don't have to disclose where I'm getting that money from. And that's where a really good book called Dark Money that really unravels the entire Koch brothers network who were really pioneers in this space is a really good read for anyone who wants the backstory of how we got to here.
Wow. Um, so basically, through these PACs, both major parties are able to set an agenda that's completely perhaps disparate from of the benefits that they could invoke for average working Americans, because now we have unknown donors with large amounts of money, human and business, able to influence in Congress. Am I right?
You're 100% right.
That's almost overwhelming to think about. Um, in your book, you have a very specific example that makes an investment thesis. Can you go into that?
Yeah, so I think it's worth asking the question, if you're a billionaire, why spend all this money on elections? I mean, they're spending millions and millions of dollars. Elon Musk is a perfect example of this. In the 2024 election, I think he spent almost $300 million. I think it was like $290 million from the best we can track. And the question you have to ask is that these are really smart business people. They are in it to make some return on that investment. And what is that return? Well, in Elon's case, we know that he has received somewhere in the neighborhood of $38 billion in government support back after this election. And now with the SpaceX IPO, I don't know where that number stands. And if you zoom out and just look at business across the board, for the amount of money that the billionaire corporate elite class donate to campaigns, they get trillions of dollars of contracts and support and tax cuts back. Just in the big, beautiful bill alone, the wealthiest Americans are receiving back as a group $390 billion a year in tax cuts. So it's a good investment for them. If they can invest enough money to get politicians elected who will keep doing those sort of tax cuts, corporate deregulation, and supporting their particular business, there's a lot of money to be made. And there's a lot of really wealthy people making a lot of money.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here, right? Why perhaps would some people say you're just punishing people who are very successful?
Yeah,
If
it's a
without
fair
these
question.
loopholes, they're already paying so much money, right? I apologize. I should have
All good.
given you more time.
No, it's all good. It's the idea that you're punishing people assumes that they should already have it and that you're taking it
Mm.
back unfairly. And what I would say is when you zoom out and look at sort of 1980 till now, corporate profits and their profit margins have more than doubled now. And at the same time, we're setting records about stock buybacks. So companies making so much profit, they don't know what to do with the money other than buy back their own stock. I'm sure they would say it's the best investment they can make. At the same time, people are working more hours and earning less per hour than ever before. And the amount of money that workers are taking home for producing all this wealth is becoming a smaller and smaller fraction of the overall wealth. And so at the end of the day, the reason why you use taxes and people shy away from the term wealth redistribution as though it's some really scary term that communists and socialists use to like scare you off. But the reality is we are redistributing a whole lot of wealth from the bottom 50% to that top 1% in the first place. In the last, I think, 40 or 50 years, we have transferred somewhere between 50 to 90 trillion dollars, depending on
Mhm.
how you measure it, from the bottom 50% to the top 1%. And so to say that we're punishing them by asking them to pay a more a higher amount of taxes, and they pay overall a decently high chunk of taxes if you just look at the raw numbers. But if you look at the percentage of their income or their wealth they're accruing every year, they're paying a fraction of the percentages that working class people are making. So I don't know if it's really theft, or I don't know if it's really unfair or hurting them. I think they've been hurting the overall system. And what an increased tax rate might do is pull some of that money back.
Okay. So, to make sure that I have this, politicians spend the majority of their time with wealthy donors and lobbyists because their survival depends on it, essentially. And then Citizens United made that dynamic dramatically worse by removing the limits on how much money can flow in. And the people writing the biggest checks have made the math explicit. They expect a return. Yes?
That's exactly it. And it has a direct effect on what gets passed. Corporate tax cuts, which poll terribly, by the way, pass regularly. Policies with 80+% public support stall indefinitely. The system is responsive, just not to most of us. And the money is only part of it. Once you've bought your way in, the next step is making sure your voters keep winning, even if fewer people vote for you. That's the next episode, the maps.
Thanks for being here, everyone. This is a copy of You Shouldn't Have to Kill to Get Ahead. Get one. We'll see you next time. Take care.